to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Penna Dexter.
Wall Street Journal today published an opinion piece by Bernard Swaim, Why Climate Ideology is Dying. Boy, you never thought, really, this came kind of suddenly, this kind of a switch. But he says, momentous social movements begin to die the moment adherents figure out their leaders don't believe what they say. He says the climate ideology was alarmist and in no way settled, and that should have been obvious. It wasn't really obvious to a lot of people. I think a lot of people thought that, at least among the elites, that climate change or the fact that humans were hurting the climate with their energy policies and things like that, that was settled and that we needed to deal with that and that all our laws and policies needed to support that. But that's certainly changed, and we've seen President Trump issue many, many executive orders to sort of reverse some of those things that we thought we had to do for quote-unquote climate change. But what has finally convinced ordinary people, says Bernard Swaim, that the doomsdayers are wrong, it's not any misrepresentation of climate framers. Instead, it's the palpable sense that very few of the doomsdayers believe what they say. And he just cites some of the wealthy people that go to places like Davos in their own private jets and, the way that they consume energy in their own homes and in their own lives. And he says that, he doesn't really think the elites ever really, truly believe this. I don't know if that's true. I'm going to ask my guest. My next guest is Jason Isaac, and he is Senior Manager and Distinguished Fellow of Life Powered at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. He's also founder and CEO of American Energy Institute. He's a fourth-generation native Texan, and he was elected 4 times as state representative for Hays and Blanco counties in the beautiful Texas Hill Country. Jason, thank you for joining me.
That's great to be on. Thanks for having me.
It's good to have you. I'm excited because I'm coming down to Austin to the Texas Public Policy Foundation Policy Conference next month. And I love just learning so much there. And I've learned a lot about energy from you speaking there and some of your colleagues. But, watching President Trump on that first day issue all the executive orders, and many of which had to do with energy policy, how are you feeling that day?
I'm feeling great. Like he'd accomplished more in 100 minutes than the prior administration had accomplished in 4 years, pulling us out of the Paris climate cartel, which is just fantastic. Not a single large company or country is meeting their commitments. Even France isn't meeting the commitments of the Paris Climate Accord, which is laughable. The country it's named after, Paris, France, can't even meet their own commitments. And they're just proving that decarbonization is a political agenda that does nothing to mitigate a changing climate. You talk about these elite globalists that are heading off to Davos that live a high carbon lifestyle, but don't want anybody else to. And I live one, and I think the rest of the world should too. It's one of the reasons I said that in front of Congress, that Jamie Raskin, the progressive congressman from Maryland, called me the Carbon King. It's now my nickname. It's on my license plates, my business cards, my name tags. I embrace it. I hope the rest of the world gets to live a high carbon lifestyle and get clean air and clean water, things that we take for granted here in the United States. President Trump recognizes that, and he is peeling back the awful layers of the climate alarmism that was in the prior administration.
So what this has all been in service of, I think the emperor has no clothes, but what they've said it's in service of is a so-called climate crisis, which is sort of a hoax, isn't it?
It really is. If we're living in a climate crisis, we're living wonderfully well. Deaths from weather-related events over the last 100 years have decreased. They're down 99%, while our population has quadrupled. We're feeding more people than we've ever fed before, and we're using less land to do it. When you have access to affordable and reliable energy that's dense, these things are amazing. And this is the economic prosperity that we've experienced here in the United States. I was listening to the confirmation hearing of Department of Energy Secretary nominee Chris Wright and talking about how there's 1 billion people on the planet that live in prosperity, that have access to affordable and reliable energy. Only 1 billion. Now, there's 1 billion that have no access whatsoever. And he understands the connection to this great life is energy. Energy poverty is poverty. And here in the United States, we stand over the key to eliminating global poverty with the energy that we produce more responsibly than anywhere else on the planet. So if there is a climate crisis, I love it. I want more of it.
Yeah, and so, but Trump has declared a climate emergency. So I'm not exactly sure what that is. Maybe you know, and I'd love to hear if you do know what that means. I mean, I know that a lot of policies are being changed in service to a climate emergency and declaring that. But what is a climate? What's our climate emergency?
He declared an energy emergency, contrary to what the Biden administration.
Sorry.
That's all right. That's all right. Don't want people to get confused. But it was the
Yeah.
Biden administration who was under so much pressure to declare a climate crisis, a climate emergency, and use every facet of the government at its disposal and mobilize the military to get rid of our gas-powered vehicles and come by our homes and make sure that we're installing solar panels. In an energy emergency, to the contrary, is saying that we have way too many regulatory hurdles to get energy to market. He lifted the pause on LNG export terminals. That's liquefied natural gas. It's as dense as you can make natural gas so that we can transport it on the seas and get it to our allies so that they can get our American energy, they can experience our clean air, and reduce the cost and their dependence from countries that really don't like us very much, that don't like liberty very much. And so this is a great move to just eliminate the regulatory hurdles because they are way too high. They're driving development to other countries. As soon as the Biden administration issued a pause on LNG export terminals, within weeks, you had new terminals being announced in the Middle East, in Qatar, in Saudi Arabia. We should be exporting our natural gas here via LNG export terminals, and that's going to start happening. We're going to see significant investment in American energy production, and that is what is behind this energy crisis, the regulatory hurdle that these companies face that just drive investment into other countries.
Do you think European countries, I mean, all things being equal, if they can get as much energy as they need from us, are going to get it from us?
I think they're going to. You look at Germany; they're facing 2 years of a recession and very close to a depression. Half of their automobile manufacturing capacity is idled. They're the number one economy. I should say they're the largest economy in the EU right now, and they are deindustrializing rapidly. Companies like BASF, a world-leading chemical manufacturing company, is shutting down and idling operations in Germany. That's where they're headquartered, and they're moving operations to China, and they're citing energy costs as the reason. It is crushing their economy. Their electricity, in some cases, are 10 times more expensive than it is here in the United States. 10 times. That's why freezing deaths are on the rise. I remember the Biden administration talking about heat deaths being the number one killer. That couldn't be further from the truth. It's actually cold-related deaths are 40 times more prevalent than they are heat-related deaths. And people are freezing during the winters in Europe because they can't afford to heat their homes. It's absolutely appalling that first world countries are experiencing this, but this is what China has been pushing with their climate propaganda through nonprofits here in the United States to scare us, to scare children, to scare people into action for something that just isn't the case. And I think that's why people are rejecting the climate alarmists, screaming not a single prediction has come true over the last 50 years from the climate alarmists.
Yeah, I think people were already kind of onto it because it didn't seem like it was very much of an election issue, the climate itself. I mean, I think the damage from the climate change agendas was more of an election issue than the climate, which, I mean, that, it used to be more of an issue, but if you made a list of the election issues, it was at the bottom or not on there.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. When you look at some of the top 10 issues, some of the cases it wasn't even in there. And so that tells me that people are waking up. The UN constantly polls this from people around the world, and they get angry when it doesn't show up even in the top 20. You'll list 24 items, and that'll be the 23rd. People want to know that they're going to be able to get food. They want to know they're going to be able to have energy. They want to survive. And places that have affordable and reliable energy have the highest survival rates on the planet. Places that have high
better lifestyle.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the people that live the high carbon lifestyle. They have high CO2 emissions per capita. They are living incredibly well lives, and the rest of the world should get to experience that too, and not worry that their emissions are doing anything to change the climate, because more and more research is showing that those CO2 emissions aren't affecting the climate or temperature whatsoever.
We'll be right back with more of Point of View.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
My guest is Jason Isaac. We are talking about the lifting of restrictions on energy production. It makes for cheaper energy. It benefits the U.S., our businesses, our citizens, and really the whole world. One of the, I guess, swords that was hanging over us was the EV mandate. California, very strict requirements to have all sales of cars be electric vehicles very soon. And the U.S., the federal mandate that was kind of coming off of that. It was already very apparent that it wasn't going to work, that we're not ready for anything like that. But it's gone. It's just gone, Jason. And, it's kind of exciting.
It really is, and we've got some work to do because there are so many ways that we are mandated to drive and that automobile manufacturers are mandated to make EVs. People think, oh, there's no EV mandate. I can go buy whatever car I want to buy. But the automobile manufacturers are transitioning to EVs, and they're doing it because they have to in order to comply with federal requirements from the Department of Transportation, namely the corporate average fuel economy, where they mandate that cars get up to 59 miles per gallon. By the end of the decade, it'll be up at over 90 miles per gallon. Well, it's really hard for a gasoline car to make that kind of gains. It's hard for a hybrid to make that kind of gains or mileage. But what they do is they give electric vehicles this arbitrary number of equivalent to 114 miles per gallon. And then they give them a multiplier. It's this illegal multiplier that I've researched and studied about, that they get over 700 miles per gallon credit, and they trade the credits. And it's the only way that they can make their fuel economy requirements is to either buy credits, and that's how Tesla is making their profits, selling credits. They break even selling cars, but it's the selling of the credits where they make millions of dollars. Every single internal combustion engine, gasoline or diesel vehicle that's sold, about $2,000 of the price of that vehicle is subsidizing electric vehicles. When you look at the electric vehicles that are sold, it's nearly $100,000 per EV that it's receiving in subsidies, in credits, and ratepayers that are paying higher costs for utilities to invest in infrastructure to charge EVs. If that goes away, cars are going to be a lot more affordable, electricity will be more affordable and more reliable, and the consumers will win, and our automotive industry, manufacturing will flourish and take off, making cars that people really want.
So do you think this will take a long time for this to sort of turn around the Titanic? Because these car manufacturers have had to get on board with this agenda, they thought, to survive. So do we need more directives from the federal government? Do we need business just to make different decisions? What do we need?
Yeah, we absolutely need businesses to make different decisions. And it's the reason why Ford is coming out and saying, please don't get rid of the EV mandate. They waste billions of dollars every quarter making electric vehicles, but there they are saying, don't get rid of the mandate, which is just incredible. But they spend a lot of money on manufacturing them. They buy Chinese components to make the EVs, which is really unfortunate. But I think you will see new automobile manufacturers come into existence if they don't have these burdensome corporate average fuel economy requirements in making more efficient vehicles. I think you get rid of the illegal multiplier, you're going to see companies start to make hybrids, and that's what customers really want. With the exception of Tesla, their owners are very brand loyal. They're the only manufacturer that if you buy a Tesla, typically right at over half of their owners are going to go buy another one when it's time to get a new car. Every other manufacturer, over half of the buyers are going back to gas or diesel vehicles. So Tesla has brand loyalty. They're the only ones that do, but people by and large don't want electric vehicles. They're in most cases cars that are owned by people that are making over $100,000 a year. And in most cases, they're a second option. They're another vehicle for short commutes. I refer to them as fancy golf carts.
Yeah, really. And I don't really want to get into how much pollution they cause, but let's just go, because we don't have a lot of time, to some of the other policies. For instance, Joe Biden, he stopped some pipelines and things, like the Keystone Pipeline. And I saw that you were quoted in an article about the Canadian premier saying she might want to discuss bringing back the Keystone Pipeline. What do you think?
No, it would be incredible. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of investment to do it right now. But if you start to get rid of some of these regulatory hurdles, which are called for in the energy emergency executive order that President Trump signed, and you can get rid of some regulatory hurdles in Canada, there is a possibility to expand that pipeline. It's mostly complete. But what happened is during the Biden administration, they said, we're not going to do Keystone. And so China came in and said, we'll take the oil. And they built a pipeline heading west through Canada to the port, and China is now refining that oil. For the first time in China's existence, they're exporting energy. They've always been net consumers, but they've been buying oil from Iran, ignoring decades, if not longer, years of sanctions against Iranian oil, sending $5 billion to Iran every month. They've been buying oil from Canada, and they don't care about pollution control technology like we do here in the United States. They don't care about human rights. But it would be great to have that oil come into the United States, into our refineries that actually use pollution control technology. It would lower the cost of food. That heavy, sour crude oil in Canada is really high in sulfur, which is a primary component in fertilizer, which would reduce the cost of food fertilizer. This is how President Trump is going to bring the cost of food down. He's talking about reducing the cost of energy. Well, as Chris Wright alludes to, energy isn't part of the economy, it's the heart of the economy.
Yes, it really is. I think President Trump, it's wonderful to have a president that understands that and is acting on it. What other policies can you see change fairly quickly with regard to energy, coming up under this Trump administration?
I think you're going to see fewer regulations out of the federal government. I'm really most excited about this social cost of carbon, and this is where it gets a little bit wonky, and I'm sure people are going to talk about it at the Texas Policy Summit that you mentioned earlier. But this is essentially applying a cost-benefit analysis to regulations. And the leftist governments have said, oh, well, we have to consider the catastrophic climate crisis, again, that we're all living wonderfully well through. And they've put in this social cost of carbon. And President Trump is undoing that, and I think it's a great thing. There's actually a benefit to CO2. It's necessary for life on Earth. It's a trace gas in the atmosphere. Man is responsible for an incredibly small percentage of it. I tell people to embrace the high carbon lifestyle and wish the rest of the world gets to do the same.
Well, we could begin living according to science again.
Amen. Amen. It was a great communicator there in Dallas that taught me don't repeat the negative. It was Mary Spaeth. She's a great communicator from the Reagan administration and taught me don't repeat the negative. And it was Al Gore that just came out talking about environmental justice. And he said, environmental justice isn't some imaginary woke agenda. Why would he say that? Of course, it's an imaginary woke agenda. He shouldn't have said that. It's poor communication. He did. He repeated the negative, and now everybody thinks, wait a second, environmental justice is a woke, imaginary agenda, and that's exactly what it is.
Well, may it be banished. Jason, thank you so much for joining me today. I love talking to you about the sort of the happy future we have with regard to energy. I know there's a lot to be done. There's a lot to understand. I'm glad you're on the case and doing that. Maybe I'll see you in Austin next month. And thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me on. See you soon.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Jason, thank you so much for your time today, sir.
Hey, thanks. My pleasure. Good talking.
Take care.
All right, bye-bye.